Okay, we're
Welcome
good.
everyone. Welcome everyone to this week's Sustainable Change Alliance conversation titled Patagonia in Business to Save a Home Planet. This is our 15th conversation since we went fully online back in April. I'm Jonathan Gartner, a board member of the SCA Foundation, and I'll be your moderator today. Sustainable Change Alliance is an impact-oriented, member-based, not-for-profit education group. We're focused on impact investing, which we define as bringing financial and other resources to double and triple bottom line organizations. These organizations are trying to address big social, environmental, or health-related issues, and they're trying to do it in a sustainable or profitable manner. Some of those organizations are for-profit, some are non-profit, and some come from the independent sector. I'd like to acknowledge the hardworking, dedicated SCA board members that are in the meeting. I'd also like to give gratitude to our members that are on this call. And finally, we couldn't do any of this without our sponsors, who are founding sponsors, Argyle Capital Partners, Impact Family Office, Maps.com, and UBS, our platinum sponsor, Nixon Peabody Law Firm, and our silver sponsor, Brashears Insurance. If you're not yet a member of Sustainable Change Alliance, we encourage you or your organization to join us on this journey. Visit sustainablechangealliance.org, where you can sign up as a member, see recordings of previous SCA conversations, and become part of the community. You can also find the previous SCA conversations on our YouTube page. So as I mentioned at the start, this meeting is being recorded. Everyone's on mute except for myself and our guest. And I encourage you to use the chat room on your screen if you want to ask any questions. So with those opening remarks out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest. Alex Kremer is Director of Corporate Development at Patagonia and an investment principal at its investment arm, Tin Shed Ventures. Alex, thank you for joining us from the road in Western Colorado.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to share just a small story that Alex and I met when he used to live in my neighborhood. I think he was walking his dog. We got chatting and he told me what he did for a living. And I said, this guy's got the coolest job in the world. So, I'm thrilled that you're on that you're sharing that with us today in the conversation. And I'm sure this is a friendly crowd because I'd wager that almost everybody on the call has a piece of clothing or equipment from Patagonia in their closet. So Alex, I think a lot of people like origin stories. Could you start out by telling us the Yvon Chouinard Patagonia founding story?
Yeah, of course. And again, thank you all for having me. I've, as Jonathan mentioned, it was nice running into him a few years ago, and I've kept in touch. I'm on the email list and all that, so it's nice to be able to speak with all of you today. Yeah, I joined Patagonia 4 years ago, and I obviously knew them from the apparel that they made. I knew a little bit about their environmental mission, but didn't know the extent of it. And I was actually surprised to realize that Patagonia started as a climbing company. Our founder really didn't plan on being a businessman and creating $1 billion+ company. He really just wanted to do his craft, which was climbing at the time. And that was 4 decades ago. So he started making climbing equipment in his forge in Ventura. He moved to Ventura because there was a good surf break. So while he was making his gear in preparation for climbing, he could surf, and then he'd go to Yosemite and spend weeks, months on end in Yosemite climbing a lot of first routes there. And one thing he realized was that every time he would use the equipment he made, he hammered his pitons, is what they're called, into the rock, and realized he's chipping out pieces of rock every time he climbs. And so essentially he was killing the thing that he loved the most to do his craft. So he did create a business around these pitons, around this climbing equipment, but he decided to stop making it and tried to revolutionize the way that equipment was made. And so he essentially ignited the clean climbing movement, where rather than hammering the pitons into the rock, he created this wedge that wedged and could be removed without damaging the rock. And that was kind of his first foray into things can be done a little bit more responsibly. We don't have to, make stuff and damage it and consume it, but rather make stuff that lasts, that's more environmentally responsible. And that evolved from climbing equipment to, he went to Scotland once, he got rugby shirts, and he realized, oh, these things are really good for avoiding scratches on my arms when I climb. So he, bought a few of those, sold those in the US, and that's where the apparel arm started. And really from there, he just built this apparel business, and he kept asking questions. So he made a lot of he used a lot of cotton in his gear. And then he realized he went to a cotton farm that was a traditional non-organic, using pesticides and synthetic inputs. And he realized there was a lot of farmers who were sick, and he heard some of their stories. And he said, I contribute to this. So he right then and there vowed to be 100% organic cotton. And since then, we're one of the few companies that is 100% organic cotton, and we try to bring other brands along. So really the whole mantra has been, how can we do things more responsibly, knowing that everything we make has an impact, uses resources, uses energy to make, even from a shirt, the simplest item, uses a ton of water. So that's kind of what drives the decisions that we make as a company, including the things that I think about in my role.
That's great, thanks. Could you maybe, you answered the word mission, and you talked about how that kind of drives your decisions. Can you just drill down a little bit and share a little bit, how does that focus on mission affect your company culture? How does it affect your day-to-day operations, your supply chain, all the day-to-day pieces of the business that you think about?
Yeah, and actually 2 years ago, we changed our mission statement from build the best product, cause less environmental harm, and inspire solutions to the environmental crisis. And that made sense because we did want to be a product first company. But the thought of causing less harm, didn't sit well with a lot of our employees. Like, we just don't want to cause any harm. And how about we try to do things for the benefit of the planet? And so 2 years ago, we shifted that mission statement to, we're in business to save our home planet. And it's a challenging mission, but it makes our decisions pretty clear. I would say from an investment standpoint, sometimes it gets frustrating because there are very good stepping stones to achieve that ideal outcome. But with that mission, there's urgency to the planetary crisis, and we can't take these small steps. We need to do the bold moves to really improve our planet. And that's why our mission is really clear. And when we look at investments, that's the lens through which we look. And we try to hold ourselves accountable by asking questions on, how do we make product? What materials are we using? If it has good water usage, what's the carbon usage? What's the raw material being used? So that really drives all of our decision making at the company level. And then, trying to solve where we are most harmful, that's a lot of times what drives our investment approach.
And a lot of companies have I'll call them sustainability departments. But it sounds to me like this is not something that's isolated. Does this cut across the whole company?
Yeah, I think that's what's really nice is we definitely, all decisions, but particularly the investment ones, it's not like we look at a company, great entrepreneurs, great business model, do our Excel sheets, and then at the end say, okay, social person, check off on this, environmental person, check off on this. It's very much, our first, second, third conversations are all around, why are you doing this? Why did you pursue this business? What problem are you trying to solve? Are you motivated by being a billionaire, or are you motivating by reducing waste or saving water or something that's an environmentally driven motive? And so we really seek out that mission alignment and passion to solve some of these really, really important environmental problems. And then it's like, okay, we love where you're headed. Is this the right business model to solve that issue? So it's really nice that even though I have a finance investment background, it's drilled into me when my first few questions are like, what's your background? What is driving you? And then kind of the investment Excel stuff is pretty straightforward. So
Alex, now I think you're talking about Tin Shed Ventures. Is that right?
That's right.
Maybe you could share a little bit with the group. That's not a customer facing entity the way Patagonia is. Maybe you could just share, so what is Tin Shed? How does it fit into the ecosystem? Why was it created? Whose money are you playing with?
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's hard to remember that Patagonia isn't business. We make clothing because a lot of what I do is around that and kind of what else can we do to benefit our planet. And so for those of you who don't know Patagonia, we're a 1% for the planet company, which means 1% of all of our revenues goes to environmental nonprofits. And that's kind of our own environmental planetary tax that we impose on ourselves to support these organizations that are nonprofits, but doing all the right things. And then Tin Shed is this other pillar where, for those companies who are startups, they are for profit. How can we support those people like our founder was years ago? So Tin Shed is a corporate venture arm. We're a private family-owned company, so we do not have other outside LPs. And to date, we've invested almost $80 million into 13 portfolio companies. And those are solving various things from fish net pollution to reducing water usage in our supply chain, Some are very much connected to things that we make, whether it's apparel through the Patagonia clothing brand or Patagonia Provisions, which is Patagonia's food business that was launched a few years ago. But some are just really what we think are amazing entrepreneurs that can have a very impactful outcome, but unrelated to Patagonia's business. So we try to identify those like-minded, inspirational founders and support them.
So I know that a lot of the folks on the call today are investors and may have been disappointed to hear that you don't take outside LPs. But again, maybe you can just go into a little bit more detail about how the mission, the ethos, the impact ethos, kind of forms your investment committee decisions and the analysis. I think a lot of people, do try to tick the box for environmental, social at the end of the process, but it sounds to me like it's throughout. So I'd be curious, both upfront, how mission wraps into your investment analysis, and then maybe after you invest in a company, how your reporting metrics reflect that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. And what we say is we're funding the next generation of responsible business. And so we want people who are integrating environmental outcomes and social outcomes into their business model. There's a lot of people out there who are really trying to do good for the planet. We've spoken to a lot of other impact investors where we believe when push comes to shove, they might focus a little bit more on the financial return than the mission or the impact. So we really take this almost myopic focus on, we believe you can have both the financial and the environmental return, and we don't want to sacrifice either one. So with that said, we do look at what problem are you trying to solve? Is it directly related? And one example is the fishnet pollution company that I mentioned. They are extracting fish nets that oftentimes end up at the bottom of the ocean or end up in landfill. That makes up the biggest portion of ocean pollution, but it's a very streamlined feedstock. So they said we should be able to make something out of this. They started off with sunglasses and skateboards. Fast forward, they're in all of Patagonia's hat brims right now. So for their model, the more product they sell or the more material they sell, the more fish nets are getting diverted from the ocean. So there's really no way they could be motivated to detach themselves from the environmental benefit that they're having. And the way I kind of tell it to people is, if I have to describe a business in more than 4 or 5 sentences and you don't understand the impact, then it's probably not something we would look at. It needs to be a very, very clear connection. What allows us a lot of flexibility is that it is a family company and they do have that planet first mission. So while we focus on $500,000, $1 million investments, we do have a lot of flexibility where if there's an entrepreneur that's a little bit earlier stage, but has a very innovative solution to something that's a really big problem, we might make an earlier stage investment than we typically would. On the flip side, if something's later stage, again, doing all the right things, we could have a good collaboration or support their development. We might make an investment in a slightly later stage company. So there's a lot of flexibility in what we look at, but the first thing we think about is, if this company is successful, what kind of impact could it have on the environment or the industry in which it works to get more, to not just be a successful company, but to change the way that industry works.
That's great. Again, I remind you, if you want to ask a question of Alice, you can enter into the chat button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be monitoring that. So Alex, just to be 100% clear, on that company, the one that reduces the fish nets, do you have a targeted financial IRR?
We do. So we have as a fund, and we feel that, Patagonia as a company can do a lot of things ourselves. We could pay a little bit more for our material. We could make sure our garments are made in fair trade factories, and all that's great. But in the grand scheme of things, if we're not incentivizing other brands to do the same thing, then our impact is just going to be in a bubble. And so when we think of our investment fund or our investment framework, we want to have market rate returns. We want to make sure we're getting those environmental and social returns that we target. But we also know that if we speak to other companies and they say, hey, how's this Tinch Adventures thing going? The first or maybe the second question they ask is, do you actually make money, or what's your IRR? So to date, in our 6-year history, our returns are right in line with market, and we're really proud of that. And so for those of those investors who say, you know, how do you get this environmental focus? We can go deep into that area. And for those who are like, yeah, but does it make money? You know, we can pass that conversation very quickly and try to educate them on what we look for on the environmental side. And I think I skipped your last part of your last question is we do track all the metrics, and we don't approach companies saying, okay, these are the 4 metrics we need from every portfolio company. I personally, and I think the fund believes each company is unique. So you can't pigeonhole certain metrics. I know a lot of the investment community wants like an impact number that they could compare and measure and just compare apples to apples, but that's really difficult. So for us, we try to not be overwhelming with our metrics, but we do try to identify 3 or 4 really important ones for each company. And then if possible, we'll aggregate them at the fund level.
That sounds great. Again, maybe just some of the geeky investment stuff. Do you co-invest with other funds?
We do. Yeah. And as I kind of alluded to before, we're vetting entrepreneurs and opportunities all the time. And, you know, like every fund, but we're also kind of vetting our co-investors. So you mentioned we don't take outside capital, but we do get a lot of inquiries like, would you think about it? Because we're interested in having that, you know, untarnished environmental focus. And that was one of my interests. One thing that made Patagonia really interesting was it's clear what the mission is. These investments support that, it's not a sales pitch to a certain market of LPs that we have this social angle or environmental angle. But yeah, so we're always thinking about who is this co-investor, because if we both own a similar stake or if they own a larger stake, even though we have what we think is a very ambitious mission environmentally, if there's an investor that has a majority stake or a majority voting stake and they just care about the financial return, you know, it doesn't really matter what we think if it comes to that 6-8 year time horizon and they're ready to sell. So we are very, very focused on who we're partnering with on the investor side as well.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the balance between risk and return and impact is one that impact investors are always juggling with. So good that you're quite conscious of it. Let's go back to Patagonia, the clothing company. I see that one of your newer business lines is, I think you guys call it Warrenware. And to be a little provocative, it's basically used clothes. So what is a new clothing company like Patagonia doing selling used clothes?
Yeah, no, that's great. And when you introduced me, you mentioned that I work in the corporate development department. And so Tinshed Ventures is where we invest in startups. Warmwear is our startup that we manage. And so our founder has said the best garment for our planet is one that already exists. And so as a company, I think that means we can make a product as responsible as possible up until that initial sale, but then we have no idea what happens to it afterwards. You could wear it once, throw it away. Who knows how you deal with it? So for us to be real product stewards, we should offer repair. We should offer buyback. We should recycle a garment if it can't be repaired. And so that's what Warrenware is. Warrenware is our startup that launched in 2017 to say, if you have an old jacket, we'll give you up to $100 for that. We'll buy it back. We'll make sure it's functional. We'll repair it if necessary. We'll clean it, and then we'll sell it on warmer.com. So it's nice to hear that your audience is a lot of Patagonia. If you're not wearing that audience, we will buy it back from you. And we have our own web presence, warmwear.com, where you can kind of see what the different products are worth. But again, it's something that we think we need to do, because I won't give the numbers, but we've sold a lot of product in our history, and we've gotten a good amount back in the first few years of the program, but we have a long way to go. And so my prediction and my hope is that over the next 5-10 years, Warrenware is a much bigger part of Patagonia. And what's nice is that Adidas, the North Face, REI, like Barber, the jacket company, all these companies are actually launching their own Warrenware type programs. And part of it is they want to do the right thing. And part of it is eBay's massive, ThreadUp, Poshmark, all these secondhand marketplaces are growing like crazy, and their used products are being sold. And so they can't ignore it. So they want to make sure it's a good experience, take ownership of it. And I think that's really exciting as part of Patagonia.
That's great. And it's kind of the counterintuitive thinking that, instead of disrupting your own business, you're actually creating a whole new business. So very interesting.
Yeah,
Could we go?
I'll just add, I think in 2015, we took out our only advertisement in the New York Times or in like a big publication ever. And it said, don't buy this jacket. And it was all about, it was kind of the first iteration of Warmwear. And it was all trying to educate people on when you buy a jacket, this is what goes into it, from the water, the energy, the raw materials. Like, it's a lot. And a lot of people don't know that. So the most responsible thing we can do is think about, do I really need that jacket, or can I extend the life of something I already own? Can I repair it? Can I hand it down? And so that's this whole concept. And that was certainly a counterintuitive marketing, if you want to call it that. It resulted in I think, a lot of brand loyalty, but yeah, it's a growing piece of the business for sure.
It could have been a very interesting meeting with your ad agency. Could you maybe go back again into the whole kind of network, the ecosystem that that Patagonia is involved with? You know, you're buying inputs from all over the world, and you have a pretty massive supply chain, and now you're super conscious of, you know, in a sense, the costs, the social or environmental costs of all those, that supply chain. Could you just maybe talk about the collaboration with your suppliers and your vendors, and kind of, you know, does this become purely a, you know, you will deliver XYZ fabric, you know, at this particular price, or is there a whole much more intensive discussion about their use of water and pesticides and, for example, child labor and all those other kinds of considerations that mission investors could care about?
Yeah, I think compared to a lot of other big brands that you know of, we have a unique relationship because we don't own our factories, we don't own farms that grow our cotton, but we have a very, very close relationship with them. So what's nice is if we have an innovation or a new material that we want to try, if you own your supply chain, it's easy to do that kind of thing. But we have a small handful of supply chain partners that are really just aligned. Like, they're really excited about things like we are. They see the benefit in it. Our founder has said anytime he's done something good for the planet, it's made him money. And I think our supply chain is kind of feeling that as well. Even if we only make up 3% of a factory's output, they realize if they can offer that, eventually more brands will be demanding it. So when we try to do something by, you know, or like reducing their water usage or adding renewable energy in their area, they're oftentimes really excited to at least learn about it. And we have a lot of case studies where they've been all in, they've made a massive change. And what's nice about that is we're not the only benefactor. So Nike, we could be in the same factory as Nike. You can imagine they're way, way, way bigger than us. But now they have a more responsible supply chain too. And I think that's what we're trying to do, you know, more than just do it for Patagonia, but try to shift the industry a little bit more. And we do that through education on the customer side so that they're asking questions and they're demanding more. And then also actually putting it into practice in how we make things.
You mentioned earlier the 1% for the planet, which is a way of routing, in a sense, some of your revenues to nonprofit environmental organizations. We had a session a couple of weeks ago on certifications, and one of the certifications was a B Corp. I believe Patagonia is a B Corp.
Yep.
Can you just maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's B Corp, there's certified, there's a California B Corp, certified B Corp. It's ways to allow a company to not only think about the shareholders, but really all the stakeholders, if you will. So it's not just about maximizing your profit at the end of the quarter, end of the year. It's really allows senior management to consider other factors, such as how you treat your employees, how you treat your supply chain, and things like that. So it's really important. It's also a score. So it's not just you have it or you don't, you have a B score. And so for Patagonia, we're always kind of competing with other companies, and Dr. Bronner's is a soap company. They're really high ranked. And so we kind of have an internal fun battle with them, trying to continue to boost our score. And it's really good as a company. And on the investment side, B Corps are great. Certifications are really important. They're also expensive oftentimes. So we don't require our opportunities or entrepreneurs to be B Corps or be 1% for the planet on day one. We do ask, like, do a self-evaluation. Where do you stand? Think about these things so you can implement them going forward. So yeah, to answer your question, certifications are very, very important. They're not the end all be all. For organic cotton, say, we have the organic certification. We put it on our products, we talk about it, but I think the overall industry is still less than 1% organic cotton. While some of it might be grown without pesticides, which is really important, the certification for smallholder farmers is just, it's too costly for them to do. So we feel very strongly, because we do have the means to do it, because we do see ourselves as people who can educate the consumer, and certifications help us do that. But personally, I don't think they're necessary for every single company.
We talked a lot about kind of, your focus on environmental responsibility, kind of water and energy. I'd be curious as to your take on, the production chain, in particular having to do with kind of labor, child labor, or other kinds of things, and how a company sitting in Ventura, California, can kind of see what's happening at the far ends of your supply chain.
Yeah, that's super important. Sometimes I feel, we don't talk about that enough, but it's definitely, just as important as the environmental mission. We don't have, like you said, we don't have the enviro and the social person to check off on our investments, but we do have a big team of social and environmental people who visit every single factory. They talk to the factory workers. We've looked at a lot of, on the tin shed side, we've looked at some tools like tech tools, applications that could be used for workers to empower them to make sure that they are treated fairly, or at least have a voice to express certain things. And a lot of times it's a cultural issue. But yeah, it's something that we are very, very connected to. There's problems in certain countries where, there's one recently that just happened, and we just pulled out of the factory. We did not say, okay, where are we going to get those garments? How are we going to replace that lost revenue? We just said, step one, we cannot be connected to this. We do not support their work. And we just pulled out, and we canceled all of our orders. So it's something that is not maybe spoken about as much as all the environmental, sue our president type stuff, but it's really, really important.
Interesting. Maybe here's a nice question from our friend John Glanville. Maybe talk a little bit about the business of retail. So how have you guys handled the COVID, both internally, and we chatted a little bit about that private in the beginning, but internally and on the customer side? And do you have any thoughts on the future of retail?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is everybody's getting really good at digital. Everybody's getting really good at e-commerce, and we've certainly seen that. So we were the first to close our stores of most of the major brands. We will likely be the last to open, just given our focus on making sure our employees are healthy. That was super scary. We definitely don't know when it's going to end, but we've also seen a pretty dramatic increase in e-commerce. So while the overall state of our business is certainly different than it was 6 months ago, we are seeing that we were able to respond on the e-com side pretty strongly. For retail and store, that's a really good question. I mean, we really hold dear our interaction with our customers. So we don't just want to sell your product, say bye, take your money, and that's it. A lot of people really prefer walking into our stores and learning about the products, learning about all these other things that we're doing beyond products. So maybe it would shift to more of like an engagement space and less of a transactional space, but retail, I think, will always be a really big part for Patagonia.
Linda asked how Warmwear was affected by COVID. Or did that help your business?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And it's been amazing. I mean, we kind of done some surveys. Are people more comfortable buying used or less comfortable buying used? And for whatever reason, people are just as comfortable, even with potential germs, and we do clean all our items. So perhaps it's for affordability. Perhaps it's because they're realizing supply chains are all reliant overseas. And at the beginning of COVID, we weren't sure if we were going to get shipments or if flights were going to be happening. So the Warmer business has been really great during this COVID period. And we've been able to update some of our processes because we had to. But overall, that business has been great. I think people have also been taking the time just while they're sitting at home to clean out their closets and get some stuff back. So yeah, we're really happy with what has been happening in recent months with Warrenware. And it's kind of forced us, because when there's good things on the sales for Warrenware, there's a quick celebration, and then it's, okay, we got to make sure we get more stuff to continue those sales, because the unique problem for Warrenware is we need to market both for supply and demand, not just here's all the stuff to buy. So that's been an interesting thing. And thinking about what incentives get clothing out of closets, it's not always just a dollar amount. A lot of people want to know what's happening to this. Can I donate it on behalf of something else? So that's been interesting to think through too.
Oh, that's an interesting fabric. How do you actually handle that? I mean, who does the cleaning? Who does the repair work? Is that all done in-house, or do you have partners that you work with?
Yeah, it's actually a nice combination with some of our Tin Shed Ventures investments. So we have this partner, Trove Recommerce, and they specialize in helping brands launch these recommerce programs, as we call it. And so we were their guinea pig 3 years ago alongside REI, and Eileen Fisher is another big brand that's doing this. And so we launched it. We did great. Now they have a lot of other brands. So they help us warehouse these unique items and send them to customers. They're kind of like a third-party logistics partner. Cleaning actually happens with another Tin Shed Ventures investment company. They take used garments and they clean them using liquid CO2 rather than water. So obviously we really like it because there's no water usage in the laundering process. There's also almost a 50% reduction in energy usage compared to traditional laundering. And then for a lot of our technical garments, it actually cleans it in a deeper way, particularly like down. If you clean down with water, sometimes it kind of mats it a little bit, but if you clean it using liquid CO2, it relofts it. It really looks like new. So there's other benefits beyond the environmental piece there too. So we partner with those two folks to make this program as responsible as we can make it. I would say the only negative is that there are a few shipping legs because it goes to cleaning and then to the other partner and then to the customer.
Yeah, but it's a really interesting example of how your financial investment is also part of your day-to-day business ecosystem.
Yeah, and just on that side, there's a lot of great capital out there that wants to do good. And so for us, more often than not, we're wondering not just, can we invest $1 million that will help this company, but can we invest $1 million and then what's this roadmap to work together? Because we do have a big supply chain. We do have a lot of material innovation engineers and product developers and designers that oftentimes a small startup doesn't have. So we're really trying to offer other resources beyond capital to these entrepreneurs and plan that roadmap even before we've made a first investment. So oftentimes our diligence period is longer than a traditional VC, which might be frustrating for entrepreneurs, but I guess it's all worth it in the end if they get the investment.
Right. And you call that Recommerce?
Yeah, Recommerce is kind of the name we've given Warmwear.
I love that phrase. Well, here's just a question for clarity about your investments. Is the 1% for the planet, that's a separate endeavor. That's money that goes outside of Patagonia to environmental nonprofits?
Correct. And Tin Shed Ventures actually we don't have an allocation. So we could go a year without making an investment. That's okay. We could go a year making a bunch of investments and spending, or investing a lot of money. You can imagine our founder, Yvon Chouinard, he is not asking, what's the IRR this year? What's the ROI? How's the fund doing? He's asking, how are those guys in Chile collecting fish nets? Like, what cool project are they working on now? So we try to keep ourselves honest and imagine that we do have LPs that are asking specifically for the return numbers. We're then thinking about our founder, obviously, what does he care about? How can we make sure, we're doing all the right things that are super aligned with our mission? And then on the product side, how are our investments supporting the inner workings of our business through product, through Warrenware? All these other connections are also bonuses.
Awesome. I think another one of your relatively new business lines, and again, in Patagonia proper, is the whole food and provision business. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so I think I kind of alluded to this. Yvon Chouinard, our founder, he calls himself a reluctant businessman. He liked to call venture capitalists vulture capitalists. So would love to have been in those conversations where he added a venture fund and where he realized he was a business making a lot of money. But what he committed to on the apparel side is we're going to prove that there's a better way to do things. And that's what he's done by kind of digging deep into his supply chain. He saw the same issues in the food system, just it's broken. The way the farms are run, the way the distribution happens, there's got to be a better way. And that's really what inspired him to start Provisions 5 or 6 years ago. Still a small business, but really it's focused on how can we use farming practices and bring products to market that are saving our home planet through things like regenerative organic agriculture, and show there's a better way than these massive industrial food systems. Again, a lot of it is education first, and we have some connections there with Tinshed Ventures too. We've invested in a bison farm in South Dakota. They needed capital to expand their business and add a certain regenerative practice. And so we saw an opportunity to help them expand their regenerative operation. And then we partnered with Provisions to create a product that they could then tell the story of this farm and why it's different than some of the other jerkies you might eat. And that's the product they made together.
And what other kinds of interesting things are happening on the food side? I see that you're going after the regenerative organic agriculture cert. So that's an interesting. Are you also very focused on the ocean? You mentioned the net company. Is there going to be products coming down on the seafood side of things?
Yeah, we have salmon, we have mackerel, we have mussels, and so every single product. You know, if you have the time, it's a novel in itself, like what all these companies are doing, and that's really what I think Patagonia does well, is tell the stories of these people and of these processes. Really, probably the most fun product that we've come out with. We have 2 beers that we've made. That was oftentimes we look at the material and what can be used or what's grown in a really special way. Can we make a product out of that? So beer was unique because there's a perennial grain, Kernza, so it regrows every year. It does not have to be dug up. No tilling exists on those operations, and it just wasn't used very frequently. And so Provisions team said, what can we make with Kernza, this smaller grain than traditional grains used for brewing? And they created this beer. And so the beer is good. You know, it's it's gotten really good reviews, really good reception. But the important thing is it's using this material that is kind of ignored, and it inspired a few other brewers to say, oh, like this tastes pretty good. Let's see what we can make out of it. So now there's a market for Kernza, and the hope is that it's a growing market for Kernza, which we believe is, you know, much better for our planet than massively grown grains that are used that, you know, maybe have less flavor, but that's just what exists today for brewers.
It's very interesting. I think you mentioned something earlier and it kind of slipped by me, but Chouinard's line about every time I've done something good for the planet, I've made money. I mean, it's just really interesting how all of these niche areas of costs turn out to actually have really interesting, you know, successful business opportunities. So you guys have been in the press recently. You're always in the press, but you've been in the press recently for your tags. So, so could you give us a little color on what's up with that?
Yeah, I got that texted to me by a few friends, and I wasn't sure if those were real at first either. They are indeed real. For those of you who don't know the tag, it says on our stand-up shorts, which is one of our classic shorts, and only on those products, we have a little thing that says, vote the assholes out, excuse my language. That is a nod to standing up for what we believe is right, standing up to climate deniers. So it's not targeted at any specific person. We feel very strongly about using your right to vote, and not just for president, but for every single office, because oftentimes your local elections hit you more closely, like affect you more closely than the presidential election. So really that's just a nod to stand up to climate deniers, and yeah, take it for what it's worth. If that's, you know, appropriate or not, that was the approach.
That's awesome. Are there more kind of these message and a tag coming our way?
I don't know if they'll be as aggressive or in your face, but yeah, we certainly, again, feel very, very strongly about using your right to vote. So we are part of campaigns we get the day off. We get election day off as a company, every employee. We're part of a big group called Time to Vote to try to encourage other companies to allow their employees to take the day off to vote. Plan your vote, so making sure you have a plan and know how to vote, know what the requirements are in your state. So it's a really big piece of Patagonia, the activism piece. And you'll see I think it starts maybe this week even, where we have a big election campaign, which will, yes, have a lot of information as part of it.
Well, that's awesome. You mentioned on having election day off. Could you talk about it maybe without focusing on product or anything, but just talk about what's it like being an employee at a company that has mission around? I mean, does it affect the HR policies? Does it affect what's served in the cafeteria? I mean, I'd be curious as to kind of how you experience that as someone that works at Patagonia as opposed to the investment side of things.
Yeah, for sure. And you have some good examples there. I'll say it's definitely a bummer that I mean, for everybody, it's a bummer that we're all sitting at home on FaceTime or on these screens all day, because it's pretty special to be in Ventura and see your colleagues all the time. For me personally, I've been in a lot of investment companies where people do have a similar mindset, similar backgrounds. Patagonia, it's all over the place. People come from different backgrounds, have different things that motivate them, but also are driven by this broader Patagonia mission. And so even on the worst days working at Patagonia, it's nice to kind of get back home and think about, well, even these bad days, we're all working towards the same thing. So disagreements are all for the good of the planet. And yeah, I do definitely feel very fortunate. On just kind of the day-to-day, yeah, we live by a philosophy, let my people go surfing. So if the surf is up, it's okay to go do that. And even if you don't surf, it's okay to run if you want to, or go on a bike ride midday. Those are all nice. On the cafeteria, we have meatless Mondays, and that's because I think we all eat a lot of meat oftentimes if you're meat eaters. We don't eat it on every single plate, and those do have a big environmental negative effect, because depending on how meat's grown, you know, they're one of our biggest sources of emissions. So there's education almost in everything that we do at the company. There's always brain foods and things like that. And it's definitely a unique place to work.
That's awesome. And is there a culture in terms of communicating information to employees that's different, for example, than maybe other companies about financial results, or about, you know, positive steps, about new business activities?
Yeah, I guess people do get really excited around these, you know, like election campaigns. People like to know, even if you're not directly part of the build up to it, you know, it's fun to know, okay, we're going to be coming out with those hang tags. And sometimes, you know, not everybody's informed because we are doing a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of, I won't say celebrations, but like proud sharing of information or initiatives or good things happening around the company. We're fortunate that business has been pretty good over the past few years, knock on wood. You know, even with COVID, you know, I think a lot of other brands have been hit a little bit harder than us. So there's a lot of sharing there. Our founder and our CEO, when we were in the office, they don't have offices, so it's wide open. They sit next to 3 other people. So it's very, very flat, very collegial. And yeah, I think it does feel very much like we're all in this thing together. We're all in the boat the same direction.
That's great. So Alex, one of the things that I always find interesting when you talk to people that are mission investors or impact-oriented investors isn't kind of what they do, but why they do it. You know, sometimes it's a life-changing moment. Sometimes it's you know, it's religion. Sometimes it's you know, your family. I'd be curious as to if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of your own personal story of how you came to, you know, spending $2 money on really cool companies that are trying to save the planet. It's a fascinating job. I'm curious as to a bit of the backstory, if you're willing to share it.
Yeah, no, of course. And I always tell that to people. You know, the investment side is pretty straightforward. Why do you want to go into impact investing? Because I think it's great. You know, every day, every week, people are asking, how can I get into responsible investing, sustainable investing, whatever you want to call it. For me, I worked at some traditional investment companies. I worked for an advisory company that advised a lot of endowments and foundations. And that was my first exposure to, okay, not everybody is investing to make a ton of money for themselves. Oftentimes, investments are just a vehicle to fund something really important for the planet, for the education, for research. So that was kind of like a little bug that entered my brain. I then shifted to an energy-focused company that was really focused on oilfield services. And I realized I really liked the work of working with entrepreneurs on problems beyond a financial model or the financials, but how do we change this business? But I didn't go home happy about, we just grew our oil field wellhead business by X amount. Like that did not connect with me. And so I kept thinking about, some people are investing for good. This is not good. And so it inspired me to go back to school to get my MBA and really focus on learning about the landscape of impact investing. And that's where I did find a lot of groups that were focused on problems for the right reason. And then there was a few other businesses or investment companies where I saw this seems more like a marketing tactic, that their impact. But again, when push comes to shove, they really want that financial return over the impact. So for me, that was, this struggle. How do I find the right company? And so when I connected with Patagonia, the mission was clear. They're not going to cut corners on the environment for a financial return. And for me, it was a no-brainer. So yeah, kind of went from the devil in the oil field services to the trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon story. We had this event on certifications that had an entity called Good Weave, which you may be familiar with. And the guy there said he spent his entire career in big tobacco, and then decided to kind of switch to the other side.
It is nice because having that background, and my boss is from Texas. He has some oil connections, and we always think about when we evaluate our work, we say, what would our friends in Texas say? And, they don't want the hippie pitch. They want, let's get the nitty gritty. What's the return? How are you guys doing? And if we can convince them and meet all of our objectives, then we think we've done a good job. So even though there's, it's a totally different world, it does keep us honest, and we try to use that.
Well, that's actually a nice way to maybe move to my last question, which is really, a lot of folks on the call are either, personally they're looking to invest in these kinds of companies that you're investing in, or alternatively they're looking to start those kinds of companies. I'd be curious if you had any words of advice to either an aspiring entrepreneur or an aspiring investor as ways of kind of combining your mission and your financial returns.
Yeah, I think on the mission piece, what I do tell a lot of people when we talk about careers and what people want to do is, obviously there's going to be really difficult days, but if you're driven by solving a problem, it's going to make it a little bit easier. If you're just saying, I want to solve ocean waste because it seems cool, it's going to be hard to get over some of those more challenging problems or challenging periods of a company's business. So I do think there has to be that direct alignment of what drives you as a person, and that'll help you in the business world. On the investment side, I didn't mention this, but we're very long-term investors. So we don't, when we make an investment, we don't say we project in 7 years, this will be 3 times what we bought it for. We realize that mission-driven, impact-driven businesses might take longer than that to mature, and we're okay with that. So I think thinking outside of the traditional investment world, investment structures is maybe a little bit more necessary when it comes to mission-driven companies, because why are funds 8 to 10-year funds? And I don't know exactly why that is the predetermined, agreed upon in the industry time horizon. It simply might take longer than that to take a really game-changing innovation and bring it to market in a successful way. And so there's bigger groups out there like the Breakthrough Energy Partners, or Ventures, and they have a 20-year time horizon. I was exciting to read a few years ago, because I think they were acknowledging it's going to take more time. We need to be a little bit more patient than pushing these entrepreneurs to make decisions that might be good for financials, but not right for what they're truly trying to achieve.
Well, you're lucky that you can bring your head and your heart to work, and you're lucky that your investment strategy can be aligned with kind of the mission that you embody, but the company also tries to live up. So you're in good shape. I don't see any more questions in the chat box, and I've kind of exhausted everything that I was hoping to ask you. And it's a sunny day here in Santa Barbara, so and we're all sitting behind the computer screen. So Alex, I want to thank you. Congratulations on your new baby. You're a brave man for driving with her across the country. You're taking time out from visiting with your sister, and so thank you to her for allowing you to spend some time with us. I want to thank all the SCA folks that are on the call. All of you who are not yet SCA people, I encourage you to go to sustainablechangealliance.org and join the party. And thank you for everybody for attending. Thank you to my family for not asking any nasty questions. And I wish everybody the best. Stay healthy and stay sane. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody.
Thanks again, Alex.